afternoon, Minister. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Professor Silverman and Mr. Anderson, for joining the Minister. As you know, we're trying to answer some of the questions that have been left hanging in the air following our inquiry into the closure of the FSS. And we're aware, of course, that there have been some changes in the government position. Some of the issues that we're going to cover this afternoon will stemming directly from your letter, Minister, to us. Some relating to information that have come from outside, including from as a result of FOI requests from police forces. So if I can just start off at the simple end and ask how many staff remain in the FSS as of today?
The number, Mr. Chairman, that I've been given by the FSS, that the closing balance at the end of December will be 510.
Right. Now, can you estimate what percentage of their scientific staff that have left have stayed within forensic science in the UK? I mean, I appreciate some of that won't be absolute because some people won't want to tell you where they've gone off to, or you won't necessarily know, but can you put some ballpark figure on?
I think in all honesty it is difficult to do so, and that is not as a desire not to provide information to the committee. It is more the fact that a number of staff may well have taken jobs in other fields. They may have taken jobs with forensic service providers, and whilst we have provided information in relation to the number of FSS staff who have taken voluntary redundancy as per the terms of the letter, there will be other staff who will have no doubt accepted employment with other forensic providers. What we have said that we would do is at the end of the process, at the end of March, that we would seek to obtain information from the relevant private companies, the forensic providers, to obtain as good an indication as we can as to the number of FSS staff who have accepted employment with them as part of the transition. Obviously, there is the separate cadre of FSS employees who have transferred to the Metropolitan Police Service as part of the separate arrangements that exist there. Obviously, we do know that 103 of those staff have transferred to the Metropolitan Police Service as per, I think, the details that were provided in the letter to you, sir.
Right. Now, in terms of the Met transfer, did TUPE apply for those people?
The Metropolitan Police have a process of, in essence, putting their work in relation to DNA and those types of analytics through a contractual arrangement. But in essence, the casework, the scenes of crime type work, that is the process that they have adopted themselves, and essentially extending some of the work that the Metropolitan Police Service had already been undertaking. So it was that element that TUPE did apply to. In relation to the DNA and analytical testing, I am unaware as to whether TUPE did apply in relation to that specific aspect, although obviously in those circumstances TUPE is a matter of law, and if it did apply, it would have applied.
So of the 103 people that you said transferred to the Met, how many of those did TUPE not apply?
My understanding is that of those 103, that TUPE applied to all of those 103.
Right. Now, for the record, it's worth, I think, pointing out that people from the sexual offences team, incredibly skilled people, have been excluded from TUPE applications across to the Met. Is that correct?
I'm unaware if that is the case, but what I can say to you, Mr.
Well, I understand that sexual offence is going to be outsourced by the Met.
Well, the Metropolitan Police Service already undertakes certain services in-house, and this was an extension of the work that they were already doing in relation to some of their analytics for which they do have accreditation. And so in looking at the TUPE transfer arrangements and the way in which the Metropolitan Police Service will be conducting their services moving forward, they obviously took into account TUPE alignment in relation to the services that were ongoing, and obviously would have had to have taken that carefully into consideration as part of their obligations to comply with TUPE.
But these particular scientists, who are extremely experienced people, these are people who have competencies in a wide range of applications, strategy setting, examination of items for body fluids, assessment and interpretation of blood patterns, complex interpretation and court reporting. They can't be instantly replaced, can they? So who's going to be doing it?
Well, the Metropolitan Police Service have undertaken very detailed due diligence in relation to their continuing requirements for forensics. They undertook that in consultation with the Crown Prosecution Service in London to ensure that they are able to have the capability and capacity to provide forensic services ongoing. And so that is an issue that they will have considered very carefully in conjunction with the CPS in relation to their continuing needs for forensics and their ability to provide the high quality service that they would expect and I would expect.
But how can continuity occur when there is, by definition, going to be this break in such an important area?
I think what I would say to that is that we have received assurance from both the Metropolitan Police Service and ACPO throughout this process that capability and capacity would be maintained. In relation to the Metropolitan Police Service, obviously they do have significant existing expertise in the field of forensics, led by Gary Pugh, who you obviously took evidence from in relation to your initial inquiry. And they have, throughout this process, given assurance in relation to these issues. And so I'm sure that you will no doubt make inquiries of the Metropolitan Police Service directly, but certainly they have stated clearly throughout this process, and obviously in conjunction with the Crown Prosecution Service, that they will have the necessary capability, capacity and expertise to provide appropriate skilled forensic provision moving forward.
Now, in your letter, you've just referred to it again earlier on, you've used the phrase voluntary redundancy. What was voluntary about it? The government decided to close the operation. So, I mean, the fact that some people have fallen on their swords earlier than the final day doesn't turn it into a voluntary redundancy exercise, does it?
We considered very carefully with the FSS the arrangements to manage transition, and therefore a voluntary redundancy scheme was put in place, and it was open to FSS members of staff to take part in that scheme or not take part in that scheme. And I would certainly like to put on record during this committee my recognition for the professionalism, dedication and commitment of all FSS staff throughout this process. And the contribution that I believe that they have made. And I think it is important for me to state that quite explicitly and quite carefully. But that was a scheme that was put in place to be able to assist and ensure that continuity was maintained. And we judged that it was appropriate to support the FSS as the employer in seeking to make those arrangements.
Okay. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. As I'm sure you're aware, the committee was fairly critical of the way the decision was taken to close the FSS. And one of the areas we were particularly concerned about is the lack of consultation around scientific input into that decision. With hindsight, and this is particularly to Professor Silverman and Mr. Renison, do you consider that the government was right to exclude the scientific dimension to the decision, such as the quality standards and the R&D function of the FSS from the decision-making process? Was that the right approach from the government?
Go first. I'm happy to go first. I would much rather have been consulted, of course I would. It was made very clear to me afterwards that the issue was one of a commercial nature, but as soon as the announcement was made, I made my presence fairly well felt and known on the issues that I think were important. And it was very early, after the announcement was made, I wrote to the Home Office and Ministers and set out some very clear views from my perspective. So yes, I would rather have been consulted, but have been deeply involved since the moment it was announced.
You ask whether, with hindsight, I'm not going to say what I would or wouldn't have wished, but I think we should be clear that it is clear now that there was probably no alternative. In other words, that the work that I did on looking at the R&D landscape was very important, and in some ways I'm very pleased that we had the opportunity to do that. I cannot see how one could have done that before the decision was taken, because to set out on an inquiry of the sort that I did when this decision was hanging in the air would have been very difficult, and I don't think you could have done a fair review of research and development before taking the decision. So if I had been consulted beforehand in more detail, I would have said, well, the thing we would have to do is to launch an inquiry of the sort that I actually did launch, and I don't think you could have launched such an inquiry while there was a question mark over the legal and commercial issues.
Okay, so I think what you're saying, therefore, is that if a similar decision were to be taken again in the future, you wouldn't expect to be consulted on the scientific aspects of that prior to the decision being taken. Is that right, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, it's difficult to say if a similar decision were taken, because every situation is different. We don't have another organisation of this sort, and really,
a significant decision affecting the science service, Forensic Science Service, then?
Well, a significant decision affecting the Forensic Science Service. If we wound the clock back and did it again, I do not see what difference it could make if I had been involved in discussions earlier in the process, because the only thing I could have done would have been to say, as soon as the decision is made, we'll have to have an inquiry into the state of research and development. And as it was, we did it more or less as soon as it was done.
You could have, for example, said to a minister, I don't think you're going to make the kind of savings you're projecting.
But I don't think that making savings, I don't think that is a scientific matter. So if I say you wouldn't have made the kind of savings, then that's immediately outside.
Immediately impacts on how many scientists you can employ.
It's not a scientific question how much savings you're going to make. It is a scientific question as to whether there's a healthy research.
So the delivery of science has no bearing on the budget that's available?
The delivery of a scientific service like the Forensic Science Service is a commercial matter. It's not a scientific matter as such. It's an operational matter.
The quality and the volume of the science that is deliverable is a function of the money available, isn't it?
The quality... Sorry, I beg your pardon, Chair. The quality and... We're talking about a scientifically informed service here. So the amount that's delivered depends on the demand, and so therefore, if there is less demand, then we get into commercial discussion. I don't think it's the role of the Chief Scientific Advisor to be involved in that sort of commercial decision. The quality of the research is to do with the way that the scientific community works, and to do with the way the different players within the community interact with one another, and so on. It's not directly affected by the financial issues. It will be related to the organisational structure. That's clearly important. But I really cannot say that making a decision about having one structure or another on commercial grounds is within my remit. I realise that the committee has already been through this with me, and I don't particularly think that I've changed my view of whether I am qualified or authorised to make comments about commercial matters.
Mr. Renson, would you expect to be consulted if a significant decision were to be taken again in the future?
Yes, I would. And something I've been pushing quite hard for is a strategic group from across all the key stakeholders in forensic science to have an overview of what is going on for the future. The Minister's agreed to that, and the group will be set up, I'm hoping, in April next year, and I will sit on that along with the likes of the CPS, ACPO and other key players. And I think there are some wider strategic decisions in the future as well. You know, what do you mean by forensic science? There are many other areas that we could have a look at that come under that label. So the answer is yes, and I've been told the mechanism will be set up for that in April next year.
Well, the decision has been taken. We are where we are. Are you both fully involved in the transition programme now? And do you sit on the board and attend meetings?
I am, if I can go first. I sit on the advisory board. There are two boards. There's the transition board, which the Minister chairs. There's the advisory board, which Stephen Webb from the Home Office chairs. I sit on the advisory board, and I go to the main transition board as and when I'm asked and there are issues relevant. So I attended the last one. I'll probably attend some more. And I've been consulting personally with the Minister and with Home Office staff all the way through as well.
Okay.
My main involvement is in, my own personal main involvement is in pursuing the consequences of my review. And as for the advisory board, the Home Office Science Director of Science, Engineering and Technology, who is my deputy, sits on the advisory board. And the reason that is we do that is because we take, I tend to work on the more external things and he tends to work on more internal things. And also as a former director and the person responsible for the Centre for Applied Science and Technology, he's closer to the operational aspects that the advisory board are looking at. And so the answer is Home Office Science is fully involved in both the advisory board going forward and in continuing to pursue the recommendations of my review.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Could you outline the specific plans for the FSS archive, including how much it will cost to maintain the archive? And could you possibly give an accurate estimate of that cost?
Thank you, Mr. Morris. We have considered the issue of the FSS archive, and I think that when I gave evidence to this committee last time, I underlined the significance to which I attach to the retention of the archive moving forward for the benefit of the criminal justice system. We have determined that the archive will be operated by a residual part of the Forensic Science Service, operating from two sites in the West Midlands that are currently owned by the FSS. We are developing the business plan around the work of the archive. Obviously, there is further consideration that we are giving to the archive, and what I mean by that is whether it should become a central repository of all forensic records from private service companies, as well as the historic archive from the FSS. And so there is a separate policy issue that we are considering around that in the context of the transition process. And therefore that is something that has yet to be finalised and determined as to which way we will go on that. But that is something that we are very much considering. So at this stage, the work around the costs of the archive are still very much ongoing. Clearly there will be set-up costs in terms of finalisation, the transfer. A number of the records have already transferred from existing FS sites to the West Midlands sites, and there's been a sifting process that has been ongoing in relation to that. But it might be appropriate so that I give the committee a definitive position in relation to the archive costs, its projected future running costs, etc., as if I write to you in the spring, because there is a business plan that is being worked up and finalised, and my preference would be to give you definitive information rather than our current estimates.
It would be helpful to have an order of magnitude.
Certainly, I think that in terms of order of magnitude, the running costs that we are anticipating will be in the region of around £2 million a year. It's that sort of indication that we are examining in terms of the the ongoing running costs. And obviously there will be initial set-up costs to establish that, and that is currently being worked through.
Thank you. So, thank you for your answer, by the way. And you've probably answered something that I'm going to ask, but I'm just trying to clarify. Would the archive be kept under the guardianship of the Home Office, or will the FSS be employed to manage the archive as well? If not, what experts will support this archive? How will it be kept?
Well, certainly, as I think I explained in my initial answer to your question, the archive will be operated by a residual part of the FSS. But we have stated that the Home Office will act as a guardian of the archive, and what that means is that the Home Office will be responsible for ensuring that the archive is properly maintained and continues to meet the requirements of the criminal justice system. There are ongoing discussions with the criminal justice system in terms of ensuring that the archive is available moving forward for cold cases and more generally in relation to the CJS's needs and requirements. And there will be archivists that will be attached to the continuing operation of the archive to be able to facilitate that continuing access.
So, if private FSPs do not contribute materials, does it mean that the archive will eventually become redundant in time, and how will this affect future cold case reviews?
No, I don't think that the archive will become redundant because of the, I think, significant amount of material that is currently already attached to it. The forensic regulator himself may wish to comment further in relation to this. But equally, we are looking closely at the ongoing availability of case files and other materials to the criminal justice system moving forward, hence the reason why I stated that we were examining whether the archive may become a central receptacle of all case files and materials moving forward, and examining how that contrasts with the availability of records from private service providers, recognising, though, that there are records and information that are currently retained by the commercial services providers in existence, and that they, at the start of this process, had around about 35% of the market in relation to forensics. And so I'm not aware of particular problems that are being flagged up in terms of the availability to gain access to those historic records within the private providers. But clearly we want to look at this in the round as part of the finalisation of the transition process, to consider what is the most appropriate way forward in relation to securing the availability of records and materials as part of forensic examination to the police and to the courts and to the Crown Prosecution Service moving forward, and therefore those discussions are continuing.
Thank you for your answer, Mr.
Thank you very much. At the time of our first inquiry, we were concerned that some work that was done by the National Policing Improvement Agency about the size of the forensic science of the possible work for the Forensic Science Service was not known to the service, and therefore its management had been impeded by that. And also that private suppliers weren't aware of that work either. We felt that was a great difficulty. I mean, do we know now what is the present size of the forensic market?
Well, I think that the market analysis which you referred to was informative in seeking to establish the direction of travel as to whether this was a declining or an expanding market, and what that analysis by PwC looking at the forensics market in 2009-10 stated that the market was around 160 million, but that was forecast to decline towards 100 to 110 million by 2014-15. In terms of the current market size, we anticipate that the previous assessments of the likely decline in market size are likely to have been broadly correct, and as I say, they are predicting a fall in the market to around 100 to 110 by 2014-15. And so that is still very much the trajectory that we believe that the market is within. recognising obviously some of the efficiencies that have been driven through the process, the developments in the efficient use of forensics by forces, and obviously new delivery models such as the approach that the Metropolitan Police Service is taking.
I mean, the size of the external market depends really on how much work the police decide to insource.
Of course.
I mean, how is that information shared between the police and external providers and yourselves?
Well, obviously the National Forensic Framework Agreement provides for the external procurement of services in the private market. We have seen no move to suddenly in-source great swathes of forensic services. What we have seen is obviously the Metropolitan Police Service taking a different approach in relation to their specific procurement of services. What we have seen is police services seeking to triage, seeking to consider more carefully the way in which forensics are procured, are provided, and it has been that element, I think, that has been the focus of change, rather than seeing lots of new laboratories being established by the police service to try and take this business in-house in that sort of manner. It has been more around the manner in which forensics has been operated and what that means in terms of the procurement of services. I don't know if Mr. Renison, the regulator, may also have a view, as obviously he's been very closely involved in the regulation of this whole process and obviously sees what is taking place in the market.
If I can help,
I think the ball's been handed.
I think it has. I think we did point out last time, Chair, that a considerable amount of work has always been done in-house by the police. So they've always done all the fingerprints work, and fingerprint bureaus cost about £50 million a year. They've always done all the crime scene investigations. That's another £130 million a year. They've got the fingerprint enhancement labs. They spend about another £5 or £6 million a year on that, and then there's their internal support for that is about another £6 million. So the police have always spent about £200 million on their internal forensic activities. Very, very rarely, if ever, have they done any of the analytical work, and I think that's where probably the concern should be around police insourcing analytical work, which is the work that's done in the accredited laboratories. Set aside the Met Police at the moment and the model they're setting up to. I do know that Lancashire Police have taken some analytical work in-house. They now do footwear and they do drugs analysis. They sought my advice before they did that, and I said it must be accredited. So they held back on doing the work until they achieved the accreditation. And they've done that in a fairly swift time, actually. I think they've set a very, very good example. But the bigger issue for me is not so much that insourcing, it's the changing shape of police forensics, driven by the current financial circumstances. So there are currently about, and this is an approximate figure, about 60 police laboratories. If you take their fingerprint enhancement labs, every force has one of those. In fact, only 2 forces share them, so there's about 42 of those. There are approximately 20 forces have some sort of evidence recovery facility, and they vary enormously in what they do and what they don't do. I predict that those 60, through the various collaboration agreements that have sprung up since we last met in April, and this is a fast-changing scene since we last met, those labs will probably reduce down to about 12 or 13 in total. So we've now got across, I'm in deep discussions with the East Midlands region, who are collaborating on fingerprints and all their forensic activities. I'm doing work with the North West region on the projects they've got running. There's the North East region who've got projects running across the country. I'm about to go and meet the South West region early in the new year. Some of that will lead to some, I think, further insourcing. I predict also it will lead to further outsourcing of activities because you'll see a rationalisation of work. I think a good example is what's happening in Thames Valley at the moment, where the Thames Valley Police have opened an in-house laboratory for some evidence recovery, but they've brought LGC Forensics in to run that lab for them. So it's a partnership approach, which I think has enormous benefits. The insourcing that has happened in the last 12, 24 months is more to do with evidence recovery. Some of that has stopped because of evidence of poor practices, and the police have put a stop to that. And I've published with the MPIA very, very clear guidance on what should and shouldn't be done. I've also published a statement of expectations about what work should be done in-house and what has to be accredited. And I'm pleased to say now that APPO have put in place, with UCAS on board, with my involvement, a very, very clear roadmap to have all those laboratories accredited. The first ones are now accredited, the next ones will roll off in about next April, and there's a rolling plan right the way through to 2015. That plan at the moment is some 60-odd laboratories, but that will shrink quite swiftly as these collaboration exercises.
Could you tell us which is the largest forensic science provider now at the moment?
I think if we look at the forensic procurement process that has been gone through, then LGC Forensics are the largest provider, followed by Orchid Cellmark, and then Key Forensics are the third provider in the market, and then there are smaller specialist providers of services that would sit underneath that.
So where's the new casework being sent now? I mean, who's getting the major part of the new casework? Do we know?
Well, that would be serviced through the procurement framework, and therefore it would be those commercial services providers that would be providing that service to the police, as I think they have done previously. And I think that your committee did take evidence that confirmed that end-to-end type of approach was already being provided within the private sector providers.
Thank you.
You mentioned one company in your response, Minister. I preface my remark by saying I'm not asking this question in any way to be critical of the company, far from it. But my understanding is that Cellmark Forensics won the tender to deliver gunshot residue work without having the facilities at the time to undertake the work. Isn't that putting justice at risk?
Well, the forensic process that was undertaken by ACPO in consultation with the National Police Improvement Agency did have a very clear due diligence framework attached to it to satisfy both ACPO and the NPIA that those providers would be able to provide the relevant services to the relevant police forces, because, as I think you will know, that this was broken down into different regions, and the regions themselves were then awarding the relevant contracts to the relevant providers in specific lots of different types of forensic provision. And certainly the assurances that were given by ACPO was that they had detailed discussions with each of the providers as part of the due diligence process to satisfy themselves that the appropriate facilities, processes and procedures would be in place. There was separate UCAS accreditation that was sitting alongside all of that to ensure that that was at the appropriate standard. But I'm certainly not aware that there were risks taken, and that the process was very clear in terms of ensuring that the availability of high-quality forensics would be provided by those companies when they said they would be providing them.
Mr. Redison, you were gaining inspiration from behind you whilst the Minister was talking. Have you got something to add to this?
Yes, I'm sorry for that.
That's okay.
Just to endorse what the Minister said, Chair, I made it very clear from the outset that work should only be moved from the accredited FSS environment to equally accredited environments. And I went through a very detailed exercise with the MPIA to map out the FSS scope of accreditation to see what all that work was and see how that mapped across to all the other providers. And my understanding is that the work has all been transitioned to accredited companies. My belief is that that Orchid Cellmark work, Orchid Cellmark are not accredited for that work, you're quite correct, but they've subcontracted it to an accredited laboratory while they've developed their own facility, which is now being accredited.
Are you happy with that as a regulator?
Subcontracting work is not uncommon, and it's allowed for within the standards framework that we have. It does shift the accountability for the quality of the work remains with the original organisation. But in these circumstances, I believe they subcontracted to a suitably accredited lab. I'm comfortable with that, yes.
It seems a bit of an odd thing to have the buck stopping at a point where accreditation doesn't exist.
But they're accredited in other areas. They've got good quality management systems.
Oh, I'm not criticising that, and I said that in my opening remarks. Turning to money, if we may. When we were undertaking our inquiry, we came across some confusing information. The Minister perhaps quite rightly said that some of the financial matters we were raising were matters for police authorities, and we were talking about capital spend by police authorities. The ACPO couldn't answer the questions we posed to their official. Since then, a number of FOI requests have been put in, which have been forwarded on to the committee. And we now have information from 21 of the police authorities. One we've discounted because it's claiming to be spending, you won't be happy with this, Minister, £474 million on forensics. We suspect it may be a decimal point error.
Definitely look at their budget.
And another has some interesting factors. Because we can't get to the bottom of what the total expenditure is, and I think you're struggling yourself, would it be fair to simply add up revenue and capital and count it as one sum of money?
I think that would potentially be confusing apples with pears. I would respectfully suggest. Obviously, we don't compile details of police expenditure, as it is up to, as I think I said last time, police authorities and chief constables to decide how best to spend their money. Obviously, it would be, I suppose, open to the committee to submit a request to the Chartered Institute of Public and Finance Accountancy, CIPFA, their working group that agrees the data collection questionnaires that goes to forces if it were appropriate for police expenditure on internal forensic activities to be collected in the future. But obviously, in an age where we are seeking to be less bureaucratic, that is not something that we have been minded to consider at this point in time.
Yeah, but I agree with the first part of your remarks. The combining of revenue and capital would be confusing. In one response, a police force says the budgets for forensic science are revenue budgets, and any expenditure incurred would have been through these revenue budgets. This includes any equipment purchases or building works.
Well, obviously, I haven't seen the FOI response that you have provided, but,
no, but
I think from a basic accountancy principles that there are distinctions between what is capital and what is income.
Well, given that that is the Met Police that said that, don't you think, I mean, maybe some junior bureaucrat who's given the job of answering FOIs from members of Parliament and give them the first thing that comes into your head just to shut them up or something like that. Or it may be a policy position. But given the inconsistency of the information that is coming forward, don't you think that the Home Office, and I recognise the point not wanting to be overly bureaucratic, but don't you think the Home Office ought to request a CIPFA that data on police forensics be collected and properly analysed in a consistent manner, so we can all understand where taxpayers' money is being used, and to make sure that in the interest of justice, something that you and I, Minister, would hold absolutely as the highest priority in all of this, that in the interest of justice, money is being spent sensibly.
But I suppose I would argue, Mr. Miller, that sense of accountability, that sense of ensuring that public money is spent wisely and is directed in an appropriate fashion is a primary factor that elected police and crime commissioners will be taking on as of next November. Obviously, in London, there are separate arrangements that are coming in more swiftly than that. And therefore, it is at that level that we judge that accountability does reside very clearly, and that I'm quite sure that police and crime commissioners will be very robust in their scrutiny of the accountancy practices and processes and precisely what the money is spent on to ensure that the criminal justice system is properly serviced.
So the record says that the Home Office replies to the Chairman's question by saying, "Not me, Gov."
Well, I think that you have to consider quite carefully on the level of granularity on information that is provided centrally to ensure that decisions are taken on issues of accountability. And we've, I think, been very clear as a government in saying that accountability resides most effectively at that force level, and that ensuring that you have directly elected individuals to be able to fulfil that function will be the most robust way of ensuring value for money, that everything is focused appropriately and that the police force is delivering on the service that its local population expects.
So that's going to put Mr. Renison in a rather difficult position, because you could have demands for expenditure that will be influenced by the electoral process coming up in the next few years. You're going to have a police and crime commissioner pushing his police force very hard to spend money in ways that may not make sense in the gradual merging of the laboratories that Mr. Renison predicted.
Well, although I would argue, Mr. Miller, that actually that is driving value for money, that's driving efficiencies, that the framework that Mr. Renison and I have worked on in relation to regulation and standards, and equally the work that Mr. Renison has been engaged in with ACPO and police forces on accreditation, is very much intrinsic to maintaining the forensic capability, capacity and quality moving forward. And that in many ways elected police and crime commissioners will, I'm sure, be very focused on delivering value for money and appropriate standards, and that in many ways the framework that is being developed will aid that.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. Renison?
I shall certainly be beating a path to their door to remind them of the importance of quality in forensic science, and that they have a clear role to maintain in that. And one of the clearest points I'm making through my codes of practice and conduct on forensic science is that authority sits at the highest level. The accountability for the quality of the work delivered sits at the very highest levels, and I'll be holding them as accountable as I hold chief constables for the quality of their work.
Well, I take the view that there's no higher level than Parliament, so perhaps it's us that ought to put a request into CIPFA and try and get to the bottom of all of this. Would that make sense?
Well, that obviously would be open to you as a committee to contact CIPFA if that is what, as a committee, you consider is an appropriate.
But don't you think it would be helpful to get to the bottom of this mystery?
Well, I think that there is a balance to be struck on the detailed nature of information that is provided by individual police forces, the extent to which the relevant collection questionnaire goes into relevant detail, when ultimately the individual police and crime commissioner will have access to the relevant financial data and therefore will be able to hold to account at that local level in that way.
So the Mayor of London or whoever's responsible in London shouldn't be mixing apples with pears?
Well, that obviously is a matter for the Mayor of London, and I'm sure that people will note with interest the FOI reply that you've received, sir.
Stephen.
Thank you. We've had a couple of discussions on quality standards, just said, and previously with Mr. Williams. You'll be aware that in our report we did suggest that police forces should move towards ISO 17025 accreditation, and you've also developed the codes of conduct. Has any of the work that has been transferred from the FSS gone to organisations which haven't been accredited as yet?
Not that I'm aware of. As I said earlier, the instruction I gave was that the work should move to accredited laboratories. The police force that did want to take work in-house It was Lancashire. They've secured the accreditation and are now doing the work. So the answer is no, the work has transitioned, and the MPIA managed this through the Slingshot programme. The work's transitioned to suitably accredited laboratories. I liaised with the MPIA all the way through that to assess risks as it went along, to make sure that the new laboratories could cope with the demand, were suitably accredited, were speaking to the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So I was comfortable that it was being managed.
Okay. There for the private sector providers.
Yes.
For the police providers, you've got this timescale which you outlined
Yes.
to Mr. Williams previously. At the moment, then you are moving it. Some of the labs that are bringing it in-house are not accredited, but
they're doing some work now, such as screening activities, which are not accredited. The statement of requirements that I've put out says that has to be accredited if it's DNA based by 2013, by October 2013, and we've put out very clear guidance what should and shouldn't happen in the interim to manage the risks. And there is a very, very clear roadmap towards accreditation, which is a huge step forward since I was here in April, with an absolute commitment from ACPO that every police force will be part of that roadmap and that plan.
Okay.
And sorry, a joint letter has gone out from me and ACPO to all police champions to make that point absolutely clear.
Okay. Is there any police authority or private provider that's actually applying for the entire range of accreditation the same way that the FSS did, or whether they're applying for different chunks for
it is different chunks, and I think it'll be interesting how that develops with the next generation framework, where the framework will be slightly differently organised to allow people to pitch in for just single pieces of work rather than some of the more complete packages they have now. LGC Forensics have a very, very broad scope. Orchid Cellmark it was started fairly narrow, but their scope is growing. Key Forensics, their scope is growing as well. But the FSS had one of the broadest scopes, but LGC Forensics were never far behind them.
Is there any advantage in having a broad scope, or do you see the way forward as very much being specialists in individual topics? Are there any disadvantages to that or advantages?
It's actually both. I think having both is very good for the market. So in some areas you have niche providers, it's quite good to have a narrow scope. In other areas you do want a fairly broad scope. And it's also, if you have a narrow scope, it does allow new entrants into the market as well, so to start small and to build up as they go along as they achieve work.
Okay. When we interviewed you, I think, did you say it was in March? It was
April.
It was April, was it? Yes. When we were doing the investigation. I know one of the things that you did talk about was yourself gaining statutory powers. Yes. It was, I'll use the word rejected by the government at the time, but was it a case of you were looking at it?
I think I said that I think the evidence I gave was so that I kept a very open mind in relation to this, and that this would be something that would be subject to continuing consideration and discussion with the regulator as we move through that process.
Okay. So how is that consideration and discussion going?
We're discussing. I think it's fair to say that, we've talked privately about it. The Minister supports me absolutely in my work, and I'm very grateful for that. And he recognises my independence as well. And I think he recognises in the longer term the need to put that on some sort of clearer footing. But I've undertaken the priority for me was to get this strategy group up and running. That will meet in April. I will then take it, I think, as a more coherent argument through that group, having discussed it with the key stakeholders there, back to government. And by then, I think also the Protection of Freedoms Bill will have worked its way through. And my other role as the interim CCTV regulator might or might not be on some sort of statutory footing by then, if I'm still involved in the role will be on a statutory footing. Whether I'm still involved or not is another matter, but there will be a statutory underpinning for the role of the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, which is a job I hold at the moment. So I think I'd like to wait and see how that develops April, May of next year.
Okay, so in April you said you did want to see some statutory. Yes. Do you still think that 9 months down the line?
There is an element of that, but I have taken full advantage of the statute that does exist, which is a framework decision from Europe 30th of November 2009, which requires the accreditation of DNA and fingerprint laboratories. And I've used that as a lever. And I've used it, I think we've managed to use it quite effectively. Despite its imperfections, we've used it as best we can to lever, particularly the police, into accreditation. That is under review at the moment. There is a broad government review of some 100 instruments that were brought in under that treaty. I think it was the Lisbon Treaty, pre-2009. And my advice to government in the review of this is that if we opt out of that framework decision, that's a point that I will absolutely be demanding some other statutory underpinning of my role to retain the levers that I need. So there are a number of variables in this at the moment, and they're beginning to come together.
So let me get this clear. The responsibilities you have that emanate from the international treaties give you sufficient comfort at the moment.
No, they provide me a lever to achieve the standards that I want in the areas that I need.
Well, that's another way of putting it. Yeah. And in the absence of that, you see statutory.
Yes, it's an absolute must,
yes.
And it's part of the equation at the moment that I'm reviewing. In the longer term, I still maintain that my role should be on a statutory footing, but that's ongoing discussions between myself and the Minister.
Okay. Thanks for that. Roger.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you could give us a snapshot of the next forensic service procurement strategy, and perhaps you could tell us when we can expect to see it.
Well, the National Forensic Framework Agreement, or the procurement framework, is something that is the next phase of the work. ACPO and in conjunction currently with the NPIA are developing that process and are taking the lead, and I'm expecting to receive further details in relation to that shortly.
So when do you expect it to be published or made public?
It is work that is actively being pursued by the Association of Chief Police Officers. It is led by Chris Eyre, who is the ACPO lead in relation to forensic procurement. And I know from discussions that I have had with him that work is advancing. I know that he has had discussions with the forensics regulator and others in relation to that work, and therefore I would expect to see further clarity in the months ahead.
The government has said that the current strategy doesn't encourage fragmentation. Would you expect the next strategy to actively discourage fragmentation?
Well, I know that this was a point that the committee did refer to in your report, and that you will be aware that that evidence was provided to you, that it isn't general police practice to fragment scenes from the same crime scene to different providers, and that this was not something that I think that was being seen practically at this point in time. Obviously, we will take on board any lessons from the current National Forensic Framework Agreement when developing the next procurement framework. Fragmentation of cases is not general police practice and has not been encouraged by the current procurement strategy, and I would not anticipate that it would be encouraged by the new strategy either, recognising the challenges that reside there.
I mean, one of the great strengths of the FSS was that it provided a great range of expertise and services. I mean, if no service provider can provide that full range, what can be done to manage the risks or manage the difficulties that might arise through that fragmentation may have to take place if no one provider provides the complete range of services the FSS did?
Well, I think it is worth highlighting that obviously around 35% of the forensics market was already being provided outside of the Forensic Science Service before the decision that was taken last December, and therefore I would suggest that this is not a new issue, that police forces in their procurement of forensic services will look carefully, and this I think is part of the sifting and the processes that are being developed by police forces in relation to the management of the forensics that are sent out into the private sector under the framework agreements. And therefore, I think that there is a clear understanding of how this process works, that is being enhanced further as time moves on to ensure that the tie-up between police and criminal justice system is working efficiently and effectively, such that cases can be presented at court in the manner that would be expected.
But sorry to go back to it again, but I mean, if a police force was presented with a very complex case that needed a number of different forensic approaches to it, the FSS was always there with a complete range of facilities. I mean, are we sure that there will be a provider that will provide that complete range in the future?
Well, I think that, as we have heard, we have forensic providers with broadly based approvals in relation to the services that they are able to provide to police services, and that there is end-to-end service that is provided within the private sector, and therefore that would be my understanding as to how the police would continue to undertake this work, recognising that that end-to-end service is already being provided within the police service in relation to forensic needs, and that will continue into the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Professor Silverman, it will come as no surprise to you that one of the main areas of concern, certainly from myself and the committee, was about the future of research and development across the forensic science.
Sure.
And I think you recognise that yourself in your report. One of the suggestions came out was about discussions with the research councils and establishing forensic science as a strategic priority. Have you held any discussions with them, and what progress has been made?
Yes. I've had discussions with both the Higher Education Funding Council, the Research Councils and the Technology Strategy Board. If I can take them in that order. The HEFCI, I actually had an email today which has said that additional assessors will be appointed in 2012-3 in the Research Excellence Framework, and the sub-panel chairs are going to be explicitly reminded about judging the impact of research on forensic science practice. And also, I have asked HEFCI to add to their list of nominating bodies the Association of Forensic Science Providers, which, as you know, includes both FSS, ORCID, LGC and some others, as well as the Forensic Science Services of Scotland and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And I've said that that would be a good representative body to have as a nominator. The process whereby assessors are appointed is somewhat Byzantine. If you know your way through it, it can only be done at the request of the sub-panel chairs. But what HEFCI are going to do is to tell the panel chairs that they've got to ask for such assessors to be appointed, and the support of this committee will be much appreciated. Because the reason all this is important is because it makes clear to university deans and so on that if they support forensic science in their universities, then that forensic science will be fairly judged in the impact calculations, and therefore the universities will get money back for doing it. Now, moving on to the research councils, I asked the research councils to consider making forensic science a strategic priority. Now, research councils have something called strategic priorities, but they have other mechanisms as well. And the response we've had is that they may not have it as a capital S, capital P strategic priority, but they are taking very seriously finding particular ways of stressing this. Today, we had the Forensic Science Society held an education industry forum at the Home Office. We arranged for them to have some rooms at the Home Office. Both the Minister and, in fact, all three of us. Did you speak, Andrew? I think.
I was there.
No, Andrew was there. Both the Minister and I spoke today. And one of the things that happened today was that there was a representative from the research councils there who actually discussed with the community the way in which the research councils would take forward this matter. Moving to the Technology Strategy Board, there have been meetings already and about this, and we've been talking about it, and they're going to try and find ways of building forensic science into their knowledge transfer network system. And again, I'm encouraged that all the different funding agencies are taking this seriously. I would stress anything, Mr. Chair, that your committee could do to encourage this would be really helpful, because it's a really important area for British science, it's an important area for British industry, and it's an important area in which the application of science should go forward. So anything you can do, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you for that. It sounds, from what you say, that you do consider that the Home Office has a duty to support forensic science?
I think that I have a particular duty to encourage all the players here to find the support they do. The financial support will come from the Higher Education Funding Council, from the Research Council and so on. All those budgets come from BIS, not from the Home Office. But I think I have a responsibility to encourage the various players in here to make sure they get their voices heard and to make sure that they get a fair share of the science budget. Yes, indeed.
But you won't be putting any money in from the Home Office science budget?
I don't myself have money to put in. We will be putting effort in certain areas. So the Home Office already has about £1 million a year worth of research in areas such as drugs, explosives, and so on. So we will be doing our own work, but I don't have personally a budget to support, for example, university research. University research isn't funded that way.
Okay.
Would you encourage HEFCE to be liaising with Mr. Renison to ensure that the support was for the kind of skills that he identifies as necessary for the next generation part of this industry?
I think the point is that when research is assessed by HEFCE, there will be expert assessors appointed to assess the research, and those assessors, what their views would naturally influence what is important. And the way that the assessors are appointed is that HEFCE will approach representative bodies like the Forensic Science Society and the Association of Forensic Science Providers and ask them to nominate the assessors. And so it will be particularly the Forensic Science Providers who would know, who would have the opportunity to do that. And there would be no reason why those bodies shouldn't come and talk to us or talk to Mr. Renison and ask him what areas they felt were particularly important.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just got two final questions. Firstly, about the research that the FSS was undertaking itself. Has any of that transferred to other government laboratories? And so that work is carrying on. And I think, from the answer you've just given to the chairman, one of my concerns is who will oversee, if you like, what research is being undertaken to make sure that no gaps are opening up and there are no areas that aren't being covered. And I think you said Mr. Renison will be doing that, but perhaps you could expand on that.
While I see it as my role to make sure we have a good landscape here, I can't comment now on specific areas of research, but if you wish, I will look into that and make sure we write to you about any specific areas of research that we can say are being transferred.
Please.
On the matter of overseeing what research is undertaken, I think this is actually a more philosophical issue of the way that you oversee research in any scientific area. And I think that the community itself has to be self-overseeing, if you like, and has to look at it for itself at what gaps there are. And I don't think that anyone can actually sit there and say, why isn't there any research being done in a particular area? It's more important to say that where there is research being done, we should find ways of nurturing and supporting it. And in the end, we must leave it to the research community itself to find the areas in which work should be done. I think that that's a general principle about doing research, rather than saying, if there's a gap, it will be filled by the community, and I don't think that I'm not in a position to say, well, we need a little bit more work in that area. What will happen is if there's an area where more work needs to be done, then it is, I think, up to the community to, if you like, spot that among itself, and we would expect that will fill itself that way.
But without it being a strategic priority with the research councils, and the community is slightly different, I think, in forensic science than perhaps other disciplines, there's a danger there that no one will actually be taking a strategic overview and saying, actually, what are we missing here?
Yeah, I must say that I am actually a little disappointed that the research councils have not yet risen to the challenge, and I we gave strong encouragement that it should be a serious, specific strategic priority, and I would hope that even if they don't give it, as I say, capital S, capital P, strategic priority status, I would hope the support they would give it will be almost as strong as that. But again, the support of your committee will be very welcome there.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, do you see yourself having a role in
Most
this?
certainly I do,
Good.
yes. And I think this was, well, I know this was a huge issue long before the announcements on the FSS were ever made. And I think but that's allowed us to shine a real light on some of the issues and for me to get more involved. In fact, we've had a very, very fruitful day today, hosted or organised by the Forensic Science Society with 14, 15 universities there, research councils there, the FSS and other providers. They're talking about exactly this. And the discussions I've had with the MPIA and ACPO have been, I think, fascinating because historically, parts of ACPO saw it was their role to direct what research was needed. So they set out very clearly what their requirements are and just expected others to get on with it, maybe. And the last discussions I had with Chris Sims as the lead on all of this, he was actually far more thoughtful and I think much clearer on it. He said, no, it's not the police role to direct what the research is. It's for the police to talk to the providers, and there's this constant iteration that's going on. And I describe it as a sort of conveyor belt push and a conveyor belt customer pull around what the research is. And the lesson, I'd had inklings around this before, but it's made much clearer to me today that in that constant iteration that's forever going around, you include academia as well, and they have an input. And so I think you're almost constantly revising what your research needs are based on the customer requirements. By the customer, I mean the criminal justice system, but the police have a large say in that. What the universities are able to provide into that, what funding is available, and what the commercial providers and the labs and the government labs can provide into that. Out of all of that, I remain convinced that we can come up with some much, much clearer research requirements, and we can then present a far more coherent argument to the research councils for the funding.
Okay.
That just seems entirely logical.
Yes, and that is very useful. Thank you very much.
Could I add that the experience I had at the workshop today and previous activities we've had have really encouraged me and have made me feel that in response to the review we've built a much stronger research community in forensic science than there was before. Maybe not stronger in size, which comes back to a question the Chair asked earlier, but the feeling of different parts of this community working together is quite remarkable and has really, in my view, changed over the last few months, and I'm greatly encouraged by it.
Thank you very much.
The final question is to tie it up, if I may, Minister. Listening to some of the answers, very positive about the direction of research and so on, clearly all of these have public expenditure implications. Your response relating to the archive has public expenditure implications. The various bits that aren't closed down inside the FSS will have expenditure implications, and of course all of the police expenditure is quite significant. Now, over the last few years, just on the Professor Silverman will correct me, this is not a scientific sample, it's a random sample. It is the 21 that responded, minus the one that's presumably got its decimal point in the wrong place. I think it would be unfair to you to include that one. But in those cases, the overall expenditure by the police has gone from 127 million down to 105 million in the last accounting year. So a drop of 17% over that 5-year period in real terms. Now, that's the trend that the government would want you, Minister, to be continuing. Given the upheaval and all of the costs involved in the process of change, are we going to see a large blip upwards that was an unnecessary blip upwards as a result of a decision that isn't so easy to deal with in accountancy terms as some other parts of government.
Sorry, when you talk about a blip upwards, what do you mean by that?
In terms of overall expenditure.
Well, obviously there is a cost to the transition process, which we have been very clear on, and that this was part and parcel of the decision that we took in relation to how to deal with the position the FSS was in potentially going into administration in the early part of this year. But the feedback that we have received from police forces around the procurement process is that this has delivered efficiencies, that as we are hearing in relation to some of the collaboration efforts that are taking place between police forces as well, that this is driving improvement but also savings at the same time. And therefore, I think that whilst this has been a difficult process, that this was a difficult decision to take, that we still maintain that it was the right decision to take in relation to the future of forensics, and that this will provide efficiencies and an effective service moving forward.
Now, you say the archive process will be completed in the spring or thereabouts. Is that my understanding of?
Well, yes. What I was saying is that we're very happy to provide further detailed information in relation to the finalisation of the business plan, to be able to give you further detail in relation to the archive process moving forward in the spring.
We would welcome that, and we'd certainly welcome any further thoughts from you, Professor Silverman, about the relationships with the TSB, the research councils and the HEFKI. And to you, Mr. Ennison, we would be grateful if you would flag up to us any concerns you have about the quality of science that you see during this very difficult process, because the one thing that we can all agree on is with all the arguments about whether it was right or whether it was wrong, the interests of justice have got to come first in all of this.
And I think that is a point of complete agreement, and I would expect Mr. Ennison to be flagging up those issues to me loud and clear if he would have concerns, and I have every confidence that he will do.